In this video, I just wanted to share some definitions of words that you have probably heard as it pertains to COVID-19 or coronavirus, and I'm going to try to make them as simple as possible. And I figured that the more we know and the more we understand, the more educated we become on this topic, the less scary it becomes, and the better equipped we are to handle the situation. So I know that I learned a lot actually when I was putting together just these definitions for this video, and found out that the definitions that I thought I knew, I wasn't completely accurate in. So hopefully you'll learn something from this as well. We'll go ahead and jump right into it. First one's kind of a freebie: novel coronavirus. Novel just means new, and coronavirus is just referring to the family of viruses that COVID-19 comes from. The corona part of coronavirus just refers to crown or ring of light. And if you look under a microscope, that's what this virus looks like. Apparently, I don't know, I haven't seen it, but that's where it gets its name. Now, I know that there's some pictures out there of the back of Lysol cans that says, coronavirus has been around for a long time. This is nothing new. Well, that's true, because that was, on the back of those cans of Lysol. Those are referring to other members of the family of coronavirus. This one specifically, COVID-19, is a specific strain in the family of coronaviruses. So yes, coronavirus has been around before. It has just been different strains. Something I figured but didn't quite spell out before was that COVID-19 is the one that we're currently talking about, and it's derived from coronavirus disease 2019, and you can see the COVID and -19 is what they pulled out of that to get COVID-19. So that's where that comes from. I did not know that until I looked that up. Second word is outbreak, and this kind of has two subcomponents of epidemic and pandemic. And pandemic actually was something that I thought I understood, but I didn't quite understand, just because it's been kind of played up in movies and stuff like that before. When I hear pandemic, I think of sores on people's faces and blood running out of their eyes and all that. That's not what this one is. Pandemic, I'll get to that here in a second, but we'll start with outbreak. Outbreak is a higher than normal rate of occurrence in a disease. So that just means that normally you see one or two here and there. An outbreak is when it happens at a high rate, which we're seeing with COVID-19. Epidemic and pandemic are simply just used to describe the size of an outbreak. How big of an impact is it having in the world? So epidemic just means that the disease spreads rapidly among people in higher concentration than normal. So basically, epidemic and outbreak sound very similar, but epidemic is just referred to as basically a small outbreak. And then if you get to pandemic, a pandemic is basically a global epidemic or a global outbreak. So if you just want simple reference, pandemic is bigger than epidemic, and that's why I believe it was the CDC that fairly recently changed the terminology from outbreak to epidemic to pandemic. So that's what that word means. I thought it meant something completely different, but yeah, that's all pandemic means, is that we're dealing with it on a global scale. Something that we've been hearing and joking about a little bit is social distancing. For those of us that are introverts, we did this naturally anyway, but basically what they're asking everybody to do is stay at least 6 feet away from other people. And the reason why that they tell you to do that is because if somebody were to cough or sneeze around you, they say about 6 feet is probably somewhat safe distance to make sure that you don't inhale any of the droplets that are created when they sneeze or cough. These droplets can carry the virus, at least that's what we understand right now. So it's best to stay away from anybody coughing and sneezing. I'll give it, maybe even double that, and give it a healthy 12 feet. And just when I'm shopping, I'm keeping an eye on people. I'm trying not to shop as much as possible, actually, but when I was in the store, I was definitely much more aware of who was around me. One thing I will point out, and something that I didn't quite catch on to early on, social distancing doesn't mean you can't come out of your house or go do things. So social distancing does not equal social disconnection. Definitely work on your mental health and go do things. Preferably take private transportation, go for a walk, stay away from people. But social distancing is just the physical distance you are away from people in your surroundings. Shelter in place is the one that actually made me start doing the research for this video, because California just got put into shelter in place. I guess you call it a command or an order or whatever you want to call it. Basically, all that means is stay at home. And that's what I was already doing. And I'm out here in Arkansas currently. My family is in California, so they're the ones who initially alerted me to the fact that shelter in places were being ordered around the country. Basically, all this means is stay at home, and except for essential activities and for essential personnel that work in different businesses, as you see listed there. Now, if you're wondering what essential activities are, they include medical care, buying supplies, outdoor activity that we just talked about, and caring for family members and other households. Now, when I first heard shelter in place, I thought about like active shooter situations where you definitely don't want to just wander out for, a drink of water or something like that. But that was one critical difference in this shelter in place and other ones that you might hear in other scenarios, is that yes, they want you to stay at home, but you can go get supplies and necessities and stuff like that. So don't panic, don't go out there and feel like you have to grocery shop today in case that you're put under a shelter in place tomorrow. Just know that this is a little bit more stringent, as when they're saying stay at home, they mean it a little bit more, with a little bit more emphasis there. So I also looked up what essential business meant, and that includes the health providers, grocery stores, people who work at shelter facilities, pharmacies, gas stations, auto repair, garbage collection, banks, hardware stores, laundromats, and childcare. I was surprised at the childcare, honestly. I thought that had all probably shut down, but they did list that as essential business. So we're kind of ramping up. We started with the 6-foot rule and then shelter in place, and now moving on to quarantine. Quarantine is just a precaution if you're well but may have been exposed to the virus. So typically you'll be asked just to stay at home, stay away from people. They usually say 14 days. If you don't show any symptoms, you're free to go after those 14 days. I know my employer is saying if you've traveled into certain high-risk areas, they're going to ask you to self-quarantine for 14 days just as a precaution. Sometimes they'll quarantine you in a provided facility, like if you were overseas and you came in from one of the heavily impacted countries, they would give you a place to stay in quarantine until the green light was given and you didn't show any signs, and then you would be free to go. So that's what quarantine means. And then the next level up beyond that would be isolation, which is if you're sick, that's when you get removed from the group of healthy people so that you're kind of alone. Isolation, ISO. It would just be protecting everybody else from the sick person. And if required, you could be at an isolation unit at the hospital, which doesn't sound like that's necessarily super common, at least right now, from the research that I've got. Most people who test positive are not showing symptoms or are mildly ill, and in that case they can self-isolate at home. Just make sure that you use a different bathroom, sleep in a different bed than other people that are still healthy, and just try to limit that contact there. And again, the 6-foot rule comes into play when you're in isolation from your own family members. You just want to keep that distance and make sure that you don't infect somebody else with any sneezes or coughs or anything like that. So here's some of the resources. I spent a lot of time on CNN today, and that's really just what triggered my interest in creating some definitions for these terms. So hopefully that was helpful. I figured the more we know, the more educated we become on it, the less scary everything gets. So hopefully that helped. And yeah, so stay healthy, guys.